IVM.
Hi, everybody. On behalf of the team at IVM Podcast, I have a request for you. We'd really appreciate it if you could go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and fill out our survey over there. It's going to take a few minutes to do, but it gives us some really interesting information that we can take to advertisers and brands about who's listening to the network. If you're comfortable giving us your email address, while you're filling out the survey, we'll enter you into a random drawing where we'll be sending out a bunch of IVM swag to some of our listeners. Last year we sent out coffee mugs, and this year we're hoping to send out much cooler stuff. That's ivmpodcast.com/survey. We really appreciate your help.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. China's lunar mission has returned to Earth after an extraordinary 23-day mission. And it has brought with it something like 2 full kilograms of moon samples, which are the first to be brought back to our planet in some 44 years. And to talk about this rather extraordinary mission, I have with me Pradeep Mohandas. He's associated with Takshashila Institution, and he tracks space for us, and he's been following the Chang'e lunar mission quite closely. Pradeep, it's been a really amazing 3 weeks, and I'm sure this mission will have a lot of our listeners thinking about India's own lunar ambitions, and we'll get to that in a bit. But I first want to start by asking you to give us an outline of China's lunar program, and then maybe hone into Chang'e after that. What are China's lunar ambitions?
So China's lunar exploration program is called the Chang'e project. That's named after the Chinese moon goddess. So it's an ongoing series of robotic missions that China has sent to the moon. They started out in 2007. So they started off with missions which were orbital missions like our own Chandrayaan-1. Then they have progressed to landing 2 rovers, one on the near side and one on the far side. They followed that up with the third phase, which is where the Chang'e 5 comes into the picture. And these are robotic missions which bring back sample back to Earth from the moon. Their next phase involves building a lunar research station on the moon, and they plan to eventually land humans on the moon. So their target date is 2029 to 2030 for landing humans on the moon. Before they did the Chang'e 5 mission, the mission that we're talking about today, they did launch Chang'e 5 T1 mission in 2014. This was an experimental mission where they tested many of the technologies that were used for this mission. So that's how the whole mission together is structured. So starting out from orbiters, going on to landers and rovers, then moving to phase 3, which is a sample return, followed by phase 4, which is a lunar research station. And eventually in the 2030s, they're talking about crewed missions to the moon, possibly building a lunar outpost in the lunar South Pole.
Wow, okay, that is ambitious. Now, it appears that we are in phase 3 right now with this a collection of a lunar sample. Are there more such missions planned in phase 3?
No, this is the last robotic mission in this phase. They have a phase 4 where before they set up a lunar research station, what they're planning to do is have 3 missions fly. One is called the Chang'e 6, which is scheduled to land at a site near the lunar South Pole, and then it will be followed by 2 other missions. And probably the last one of those, the Chang'e 8, which will fly in 2027, is probably where the lander missions will end.
Is that also the time that they'll set up this automated or robotic lunar facility?
Yeah, so they're planning to do that over 2 missions, Chang'e 7 and Chang'e 8.
So now clearly this is all heading up to manned missions and possibly sustained human presence on the moon. But before we get to that, Pradeep, can we just talk about this latest mission? It's been a 23-day mission. It's the first time samples have been collected in nearly half a century. Can you run us through the mission and the purposes of it?
Yeah, this has been a very interesting mission, to say the least. It went through a fairly complicated mission profile where after launch on a Long March 5 rocket, the space vehicle, which consists of about 5 parts, it flew directly to the moon. So the whole spacecraft was weighing 8,200 kilograms, and the Long March 5 was capable of sending it to the moon in one shot. When you compare that to our own Chandrayaan 2 mission, that mission, if you remember, it executed a series of maneuvers by which it traced its orbit and eventually reached the moon. But the Long March 5 is a powerful enough rocket that it was able to send the Chang'e 5 spacecraft in one shot towards the moon. After it reached lunar orbit, it performed a very interesting separation where 2 parts of the spacecraft, the lander and the ascender, they separated in lunar orbit and they landed on the moon. So the landing happened on the 1st of December. And then over a period of 2 days, the Chang'e 5 performed what can be called the sampling operation. So basically, it extended a drill, which it inserted into the lunar soil, which is called lunar regolith. So into the lunar regolith, it drilled into lunar regolith to the depth of about 2 meters. Once it drilled in, it had a scoop on board, and this scoop collected lunar soil in its scoop and put it into an ascender module. So basically, it did that a number of times, and it was able to collect about 2 kilograms of the sample. After this, the spacecraft performed a really interesting operation. For the first time for the Chinese, they launched something from the surface of the moon. So they launched this thing called the ascender. It lifted off, went into lunar orbit. And if you remember, we had left the service module and a sample returner in orbit along with the orbiter. So these two things is where the ascender sort of rendezvoused. And this generated a lot of interest on social media because it sort of, these 2 parts actually sort of hugged each other, or, it sort of clamped onto each other in lunar orbit. And that was a really interesting part of the mission. Then the next part is the part which I enjoyed the most in this mission. So what it did was basically the ascender transferred the sample from the ascender to the returner. And there was a video link that was shared, and they showed how they transferred the sample, closed the returner, lid on the sample returner, and finally they let go of the ascender, which crashed onto the lunar surface. This returner and the orbiter, they were in lunar orbit for some time, and in the meanwhile they landed. They hoisted a fabric flag of the Chinese flag on the lunar surface. So this is the second country to host a fabric flag on the moon. So that was a pretty big deal for the Chinese. And after that, they performed the opposite of what they did while coming to the moon. So basically, they performed certain maneuvers by which they were able to get back to Earth orbit. And the orbiter basically separated from the return capsule. And the return capsule performed a skip maneuver right over the Middle East. And then it performed, it flew right over India and then landed in Inner Mongolia in China. So that happened just last night, where the temperatures were about minus 30 degrees Celsius. And one of the first things we saw in that was the first time when we saw the sample returner, which was lying on the ground. They used infrared camera, and it was a shining capsule because it was really hot after performing the re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, and it was surrounded by a thick, dark background because it was really snowing there, and so they were able to spot it quite easily. And once it was spotted, the ground crew, so this was spotted from a helicopter. So after they spotted it from a helicopter, they were able to send on the ground units for search and retrieval operation. So there too, they hoisted their Chinese flag, as is the norm, and now they're transferring the capsule to a lab in Beijing, where after checking out that all the seals are intact, the lunar sample weighing about 2 kilograms will be retrieved.
That is just amazing. So let me just try and summarize what you said. So you're saying that when it was on the moon, first, one thing is that this retriever wanted to go about 2 meters deep. How deep did it go? 2 meters, correct?
2 meters, correct, yeah.
Yeah, so you're saying this retriever had to go about 2 meters deep in order to get a fairly pristine sample because, the moon, as you pointed out, is pockmarked with
meteorite impact and cosmic rays. So
exactly.
A sample on the lunar surface would be contaminated from a scientific point of view.
Yeah, so you'd want to go to some depth in order to collect this sample. And then after that, the sample was transferred to an ascender module, which then took off and then docked with a lunar module. Then
in orbit, yes.
A lunar module in orbit. Then it left the lunar orbit, entered the Earth's orbit, and there a returner performed the skip across the Earth's atmosphere above the Persian Gulf, Pakistan, India, over China, and into the province of Inner Mongolia finally, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
That is amazing. And I saw photos of the returner module, and it does seem to be covered in some scorch marks, obviously during re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. Now, Pradeep, is there something significant about bringing back a sample like this to Earth?
So this mission has landed in the part of the moon called the Mons Rupka. So this region of the moon is actually pretty young. When you talk about in geological terms, it's only about 1.2 billion years old. When we compare this to samples that have been returned before during the Apollo mission, or the Lunar 24, which is the last sample return mission, which was sent nearly half a century ago. These brought back material from the moon, which was about 3 to 4 billion years old. So they think that with this, they would have much more insight into the mechanics by which the moon was formed, and also to understand, the inner mantle of the moon is what they're looking for.
Now, the other thing that occurs to me is, tracking this mission has been not always easy. To the extent that I have done it, I've basically been following it on Twitter, which means mostly I've been following you on Twitter. And in order to understand what is going on, how have you tracked this? And has the lack of access to Chinese social media influenced or affected the way you have been able to track this mission?
So if you remember that India had banned the use of many of the social media sites that were coming out of China. And Weibo used to be the place where, we used to track the Chinese space program and, get much of the information used to come there. This time, we did not have access to Weibo, so we were dependent on sources within China who either mirrored the content from Chinese social media onto Twitter, So we did not have like a direct access to that medium. The other thing that we probably missed was also just before the landing, they turned off all these mirrors, and the only way of getting information from within China was by people who were sort of rebroadcasting what was available on the Weibo platform onto Twitter. So I was also reduced to a situation similar to you, that I had to depend on people who were rebroadcasting the Chinese social media content onto Twitter.
So, yeah, it would seem that we've basically gone and shot ourselves in the foot, and this really doesn't seem to affect the Chinese. It just affects our ability to track their lunar program. Pradeep, this brings me to India's own lunar program. We've had the two Chandrayaan missions. The most recent one was a kind of failure. How does India's lunar program differ in its ambition and its conception also from China's?
So I think when we conceived of our lunar exploration program, we were, I think, as ambitious as China was. But I think where we sort of fell behind was in the sense that we were not focused on the lunar mission, or we do not have, like, I think the same personnel which worked on the Chandrayaan mission also worked on the Mangalyaan mission, for example. Whereas China has been able to sort of focus their effort on lunar mission, and the same crew has been basically working on that. So India so far has only two missions. We've flown two missions. So one is the Chandrayaan 1, which flew in 2008, and the other was the Chandrayaan 2, which flew in 2019. In the same time, China has actually launched 7 spacecrafts. So there was Chang'e 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 T1 and 5. And there was a relay satellite which was flown to the Earth-Moon Lagrange 2 point. So there, in the time that we flew 2 spacecrafts, China has launched 7. Given that Chandrayaan 1 has given a lot of scientific outputs, because it's one of the spacecrafts which proved that there was water on the moon. And I think that was a major milestone in lunar exploration. And that also sort of affected many lunar exploration programs like China's, as well as the Artemis missions of the United States. And it also has an impact where Europe, Russia, and other countries are also looking to go back to the moon, realizing that it's not just a barren moon, and it's far more interesting and far more colorful than what they initially thought about. One thing that I wanted to add was, like, if the Chandrayaan 2 mission had been successful, we would have celebrated that we've already caught up with China, and we've done it much more frugally than China had done. I think that that's the wrong way of looking at how we progress in our experimental missions. So in this phase, when you look at how China has developed its lunar exploration program, it's worth commending, because they went step by step, compared to India, where we have tried to leapfrog from one set of technologies to another set of technologies. When it works, leapfrogging is we are congratulated for doing that leapfrog. But when it does not work, then I think you have to face a lot of criticism.
Yeah, and it would seem that perhaps some humility is in order for India. So, while we have accomplished a lot, China has leapt ahead of India in lunar exploration, as it has in many other fields. Still, this is an amazing mission, and it's definitely an exciting time for science. And I hope it not just inspires people in India, but it also helps provoke some sort of change in our own attitude to lunar exploration and space exploration in general. Thank you so much for joining us today, Pradeep. We are definitely going to have you again very soon to talk about many more space missions.
Thank you so much, Aditya.
And thank you for joining us on All Things Policy.
Please consider signing up for Takshashila's courses. Applications are now open and you can apply at www.takshashila.org.in/courses. If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I wanted to kind of just give a quick reminder to everybody. As I mentioned up top, we are doing our annual listener survey right now. If you could please go and take a couple of minutes out of your day and fill it out, we would really, really appreciate it. It's ivmpodcast.com/survey. If you're comfortable giving us your email address, we'll enter you into a random drawing, and we're going to be sending out swag to a bunch of randomly selected listeners. So do definitely get on board that train. Let me tell you a little bit about what we did on the network this week. We launched a new show called Zindagi Diaries with Ragini Kumar. Many of you might have seen Ragini on television during the IPL. She's a presenter, but she's showing a different side of herself over here with a poetry podcast. Give it a shot, give it a listen. Let me know what you all think. Vishal Gondal is back this week after a while. He's been on an extended break, but he has Rahul Narvekar for the first episode. Really interesting conversation. Do check it out. Raji Samant joins Gauri Devidayal on This Round Is On Me. The two talk about the wine business and what's going on there. We had a number of conversations about the Farmers Bill and the surrounding agitation this week on the network as well. Maruk Inayat had a great episode on the note. Puliabazi did a deep dive into the issues around this. And on Siders, we have our typical, fun conversation about this stuff with a little bit of a seriousness, a little bit of fun. Do check that out on Cock and Bull on Thursday last week. Akash Mehta joined us for that episode. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta. I'm B50 on Twitter. I am the host of Paisa Vaisa, a show that talks money. On my show, I speak to experts from every field of money and finance, from stock markets, equities, debt funds, credit cards, life insurance, every possible area of money and finance that you can think of. We even did an episode on cryptocurrency. I've got fantastic guests from mutual funds to personal finance experts everywhere. Robo-advisory, startups, just name it, we've got it. At Paisa Vaisa, we help you make smart decisions about money. You work hard for money. Now make your money work hard for you. New episodes out every Monday, and you can listen to my show on the IVM Podcast app or any other podcasting app that you have.